Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. You want chaos? We've got chaos for you. Welcome to Big Ten Ted Live on a Wednesday night. We've got plenty to talk about here tonight because there's chaos to the left, there's chaos to the right, and here I am stuck in the middle with you. Here I am stuck in the middle. We are the Big Ten Conference, stuck in the middle of the chaos going on to either side of us right now. So it's a Wednesday night. It's Big Ten Ted Live. Lot to talk about here tonight. If it's your first time dropping by the channel, if it's your first time dropping by Big Ten Ted Live, make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already so you stay up to date when we're going live, when videos are uploaded, content every day. That includes Saturdays, that includes Sundays, that includes videos, live streams, that includes YouTube shorts and polls and all sorts of interaction for the Big Ten fan here on this channel as well. Gonna have 3 segments here tonight. It's a 3-topic show here on Big Ten Ted Live tonight. You can get involved in the show by leaving a chat. You can leave a super chat, and you could call in 715-600-2150 to talk about one of the 3 topics that we're talking about tonight, or maybe there's something else on your mind. So you can leave it in the chat room, call in as well. There's all sorts of ways to get involved here on Big Ten Ted Live here tonight. However you may be joining us, thanks for doing exactly that here tonight. Because it is going to be fun. It is going to be a lot of fun to talk about the potential. It is going to be a lot of fun to talk about the speculation. That's what the months of May, that's what the month of June, that's what these months are for. It's about speculation. It's about what might happen. It's about what new members might come in. It might determine what coaches, which transfers are going to make a difference on the football field. There's a lot of speculation here in these late spring and summer months within the Big Ten Conference. So what are we going to talk about here tonight? A little bit of old news, I guess, right now, but I didn't really have a good opportunity to really approach it and really talk about it until now. I'm going to talk about the report that Oregon and Washington have both been vetted and cleared for Big Ten membership. Is this becoming a reality? When we talked about it before, earlier in the season, it was more of rumors. It was more of, well, it could happen, but it might not happen. Is it starting to become a reality? Then maybe Oregon and Washington will be the 17th and the 18th members of the Big Ten Conference, starting maybe as soon as 2024. Is that becoming a reality? We'll talk about that in segment number 1. And we'll also get to segment number 2, which is the magnificent 7 schools in the ACC currently talking in secret outside of the other half of the schools in the ACC, talking about grant of rights, talking about unequal revenue distribution, talking about all kind of things, maybe going so far as to maybe even dissolve the conference. What would happen there? How would it impact our beloved Big Ten? Which schools might be the most valuable out of the ACC? We're going to talk about that here as this show progresses through. So that's segment number 2. We're going to be talking about the ACC. We're going to be talking about the Big Ten because the Big Ten, throughout all this expansion, there's been so much talk after USC and UCLA came in. There's been so much talk about West Coast, west of the Mississippi. But it's the East where the Big Ten really needs to keep their eye on because things could be a changing out east. So we'll talk about that. Also want to talk about the depth of the Big Ten Conference. I believe the B1G is going to be a deep league. We know the teams at the top in the East Division. You know your Michigans. You know your Ohio States. You know your Penn States. But this conference has got some girth to it, especially in the middle. It's got a long torso, so to speak, right? The Big Ten has a lot in the middle that could maybe gunk some things up this season. So we'll talk about that. How deep is the Big Ten in terms of West Division? Who can make it to Indy? East Division? Who can make it to Indy? Who can make bowl games? Who can pull upsets? We'll talk about that in segment 3 of the show here tonight. Want to have a quick mention on something as well. I want to talk about Dylan Raiola. Of course, he recently announced his commitment to the University of Georgia. And I never thought Nebraska really had a great shot to land him, right? This is the number one player. This is the number one recruit in the country we're talking about. And Nebraska's coming off the Scott Frost era. I know we talk about legacy. We talk about the Raiolas in Lincoln. I know that's probably why he was where he was in terms of his recruitment. But I think what this tells us right now about Nebraska, yes, of course, you're probably never going to get a talent like Dylan to commit to Nebraska. But what it tells us is Matt Rule is willing to swing for the fences. He knows he needs talent like a Dylan Raiola, not necessarily a quarterback, but he needs really good talent in other spots. That's where he needs his talent. Because to compete in this conference, to compete in the Big Ten with USC coming in, with UCLA coming in, maybe with Oregon and Washington coming in, you need to swing big and you need to hit big in recruiting. So I guess A for effort for Matt Rule and this recruiting staff and this coaching staff at Nebraska, but he's going to Georgia. I know USC was in it, but, they just got Malachi Coleman the class before. Georgia still has a pretty stacked quarterback room. You look at Brock Vandagriff, Carson Beck, I think his name is in there as well, Dylan Raiola. So there's some depth. We talk about depth. There's some depth to that quarterback room at Georgia, so some of those guys might be hitting the portal. Who knows in a few years. When you have that kind of depth, kids want to play now. So that might be a situation that's developing at Georgia as well. So just wanted a quick comment on the Dylan Raiola saga and the Dylan Raiola commitment. Also want to give a little bit of a channel update. I'm starting to plan for the football season what the channel is going to look like during football season. Last year, kind of experimented with some Sunday night live streams. I didn't do them every week, but I did them periodically. They're going to be coming back. We're going to be doing Sunday nights. Not sure on the time yet during football season, but it could be. Last year I did it around 6 o'clock Central Time. It might be pushed back a little bit, so time TBD, but stay tuned for announcements on the Big Ten Sunday Sound Off, which is a Sunday night live stream here on the Big Ten TED YouTube channel that'll be coming. You got some time to kind of decompress on what happened Saturday, and then we'll talk about it on Sunday, kind of recap the week that was, because a lot of times, like this year, I'm really going to be focusing on the bigger games in terms of the reaction videos on Saturday. It's going to be previewing 2 to 3 games a week on the channel, but Sunday is an opportunity to really talk about all the games that I maybe wasn't able to get to and watch on Saturday, DVR. I don't watch a ton of NFL football. I watch a lot of these DVR'd Big Ten games on Sundays. So Sunday nights is a chance to talk about everything. So during the football season, more details to come on the Big Ten Sunday Sound Off. So make sure you stay tuned to the channel for more information on that. I am really looking forward to the Big Ten football season. It is going to be a lot, and I mean a lot of fun here this season. Really looking forward to it. So that's kind of an update on the channel over there. Let's get into topic numero uno. Why don't we? Let's talk about the Ducks. Let's talk about the Huskies. Let's talk about those teams out west. According to Brett McMurphy, this was last week, Oregon and Washington have been vetted and cleared for Big Ten membership, but there are a couple of asterisks to this, and there are a couple of, we need to peel back layers of the onion, because there are multiple layers to this Oregon and Washington situation as it relates to the Big Ten Conference. So let's dive into it a little bit. First thing, according to multiple reports, the Big Ten doesn't want to seem like the bully that goes out there and destroys or raids a conference, much like the ACC did with the Big East 10 to 15 years ago. So I think they would be more comfortable if schools like a Colorado or an Arizona or a Utah and Arizona State have also been rumored to go to the Big 12 first. So if that move happens first, then that might open the door for Oregon and Washington to potentially join the Big Ten Conference. Here's another thing to keep in mind, right? Layers of the onion. We keep on peeling them back and peeling them back and peeling them back. Another layer of the onion, according to reports, is that CBS and NBC are willing to pay up more to get Oregon and Washington to the conference. Fox is also in there, and they might pay up a little bit. Surprised me a little, and I'll get to that a little bit later on in this segment as it pertains to value. So we'll get to that. But you talk about CBS and NBC. Those are the networks that would air a lot of these West Coast home games because I don't think USC, UCLA, maybe Oregon and Washington want to play at 10 a.m. Pacific time and big noon kickoff. I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's really in the cards right now. So that's why CBS and NBC are kind of willing, it sounds like, to pay for the brunt of Oregon and Washington headed to the Big Ten, and Fox is maybe putting in a little bit less in terms of that. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Before on this channel, this very show, this very live stream, we've talked about value. And I said it before. I've said, well, I don't know if Oregon and Washington really provide the oomph that USC and UCLA did. I don't know if they provide the oomph that the Big Ten is looking for in terms of a big-time move right now. But what I just said was CBS and NBC willing to pay to get them into the conference. Oregon and Washington into the league. Maybe I'm wrong. In fact, I probably am wrong if this indeed does transpire, because we talked about value. I just didn't see it. I thought they were good. I just didn't think they were great. But with all these things, all the ducks, no pun intended, lining up, all the ducks lining up in a row, maybe the TV networks, because they're the ones that determine the value. They're the ones that pay the money. They're the ones that put the investment into the conference to make these types of moves happen. So maybe Oregon and Washington do provide a value to the Big Ten. An 18-team Big Ten with the Ducks and the Huskies would be awfully interesting. A couple of weeks ago, as long as we're talking about the West Coast, as long as I talked about what I've talked about on this show before, I talked about Stanford and Cal needed maybe to own the West Coast. I'll say this. You grab Oregon and Washington, you have the four biggest brands on the West Coast. You got the four you need on the West Coast. Stanford and Cal, although they're great academically, although they're great from a research perspective, they're just not there athletically. They don't really draw much, I think, right now. They don't, when it comes to television, when it comes to money, I just don't see it with Stanford and Cal, and I just don't think it's needed right now. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. When you look at West Coast recruits, Stanford, Cal, Washington State, Oregon State, those are your other teams right now. You're going to go to those teams maybe they go to the Mountain West, maybe some of them go to the Big 12. No, the Big 10 on the West Coast is going to be the place to be. Those West Coast recruits are going to go to USC. They're going to go to UCLA. They're going to go to Oregon and Washington. Maybe they go to other Big Ten schools. That's where that recruiting pipeline exists. That's where that recruiting connection really comes into play. So when we talk about the West Coast, it's done right there. It's done. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. If the Ducks and the Huskies join right here in 2024. It's done. You don't do any more out on the West Coast. Okay? Because the Big 12, they're going to be looking at your Colorados. They're going to be looking at your Utahs, which I know is not the West Coast. That's the Mountain Time Zone. Arizona's Arizona State, which those are teams that the Big 10 wouldn't be interested in anyway. So when we talk about the western part of the United States, you grab Oregon and Washington, move on. Move on. It's time to look east, which is coming in segment 2 of the program. So I wanted to touch on that in terms of West Coast, in terms of owning the West Coast, in terms of West Coast recruiting. what would an 18-team Big Ten look like? We've talked a lot about on this channel, a lot of other channels, a lot of other outlets have talked about 3-6-6, right? The scheduling model with the 3 permanent opponents, and you alternate the remaining teams every 2 years or every year or whatever you want to call it in the Big Ten. I think the 2 teams coming in right now would be enough oomph to get the Big Ten to expand their conference schedule to a 10th game. Right last week on this very show, we talked about the Big Ten sounding like they're going to take away the requirement to schedule a Power 5 team. Maybe it's because they want to add an extra conference game. Maybe it's because they want a little bit more money out of their television deal by having inventory. More conference games, more conference inventory to choose from. They would much rather have Maryland play Oregon than Maryland play Towson. I can tell you that much, right? Having one more Big Ten conference game, I think, adds to what the Big Ten has to offer and what it can offer to CBS, to NBC, and to Fox. So in a 10-game conference schedule, I think you'd go 3-7-7. What that would do, it would allow all 4 teams in the Pacific time zone to play each other every single year, right? Because USC and UCLA, I think the big problem that they have is going to the Central time zone, going to the Eastern time zone, a lot of travel back and forth. Okay, they're the ones that are going to every single one of these places. Wisconsin, you got to make, like for basketball or something, football, you got to make one trip to LA once a year. That's it. But it's going to be tougher for USC and UCLA. This would ease it a little bit. And keeping things in the time zone, right? Your 3 permanent opponents, like for USC, would be UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. You just mix them up with the different teams out there in the Pacific time zone. I think that would help a lot. It would also allow those other 14 schools to really focus on some of the older rivalries, to really focus on some of these traditional rivalries. Maybe bring back Michigan and Minnesota as a yearly contest. Okay, maybe, Michigan State and Indiana. I know that's a yearly game right now, but there's been rumblings that maybe in a 3-6-6 model, the old brass spittoon rivalry game wouldn't be played every year. I think it would allow more traditional rivalry games to be played and then the permanent games out on the West Coast. So I think that's very important. A 10-game conference schedule. Now, once you start getting to 10 games, those non-conference games, man, like you look at USC, you got to play a 10-game Big Ten schedule, and then you got to play your rivalry game against Notre Dame. Iowa, you got to play a 10-game conference schedule, and then you got to play the Cy-Hawk series against Iowa State. So there's going to be a few of these teams that have those yearly must-play games, plus the Big Ten, the 10-game Big Ten schedule. But I believe this will add to the strengths of schedule. Despite losing a Power 5 game, having an extra Big Ten game might actually strengthen the strengths of schedule over there in the Big Ten Conference. So another thing, kind of the last thing I want to touch on in terms of Oregon and Washington. Where would these 2 teams slot into the conference right now? Did a video earlier this week on the channel about UCLA. Where would they slot in? I said, yeah, right around the top of Tier 2. Right around the Iowas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesotas, teams like that. Oregon and Washington, I think, are right there as well at the top of Tier 2. How big can Tier 2 get? We might find out if we get Oregon and Washington. Or some other teams might drop down to Tier number 3 and take a step down a little bit. But when I look at Oregon and Washington, I think they'd be right there with the UCLAs, with the Iowas, with the Wisconsins. And Oregon has proven that they can take the step up to Tier 1. Like, I look at Oregon and Washington, the great part about them is, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but they're the only teams out of the Pac-12 to make the college football playoff. USC hasn't done it, right? It's multiple teams haven't been able to do it. So when I look and I continue to look down, Oregon and Washington are great adds because they're great on the field and they draw interest from a television standpoint. So I think they would slide in there. Oregon might be, like a couple of years ago, Oregon goes on the road in Columbus and smashes Ohio State in the mouth. And they get it done on Big News Saturday on Fox. Like, Oregon is a team that I believe can step up. Now, are they going to be Tier 1 every year? Like maybe they were for a handful of years there under Chip Kelly? I don't think so. But I do believe Oregon is a national brand that could benefit from a national conference like the Big Ten. And I think both Oregon and both Washington would be right there in tier number 2. So who takes a step down? Who takes a step down to tier number 3? So who's the tier 2? You got UCLA in there. You got Oregon in there. You got Washington in there. Let's throw Iowa and Wisconsin in there. That's 5 teams. Who takes the step down? Is Michigan State in that tier 3? Is Nebraska? Where's Nebraska? We all think Nebraska is going to get it together under Matt Rule. But if Oregon and Washington join, those are just 2 more teams that you got to combat with. And one last thing I want to touch on before I hit into the comments, before I get into the discussion here. The more good teams you add, the more teams like an Indiana, like a Rutgers, maybe a Maryland you could even talk about as well. But, those bottom teams, it just continues. Northwestern, it continues to get tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher for these teams. The more good teams you add, this is what conference realignment is all about. You want to add valuable properties to continue the growth and the revenue of your conference. But there are teams that are going to get buried. Northwestern, Indiana, Purdue, maybe, I don't know. I don't know yet. We'll see. There are teams where it's going to become increasingly difficult. But a team like Rutgers might sit back and say, you know what? We'll pocket our $100 million a year. We'll be good at basketball. We'll be good at soccer. Football, we'll win 3 or 4 games a year. Maybe we'll get to a bowl game every now and then. And maybe that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. You adjust your expectations because you're making all that money. Now you're able to build new science buildings. You're able to put more money into research. Your university is able to become more prestigious and all the things, all the benefits of being a member of the Big Ten Conference. All right, let's get into some comments here. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of the show here tonight. Big Ten TED Live. Jay Daly chiming in. Our first comment here tonight. Washington makes sense, 100% elite state research university. It surprised me. It surprised me when I did a deep dive that Washington is very highly ranked nationally when it comes to research. They're a great fit for the Big Ten. A great market in Seattle. Athletics are good on the field. Oregon, Jay's not so much on Oregon. If they didn't have Phil Knight, they do have Phil Knight. That's a pretty big piece to their university. It would be the University of Vermont. I hear it's nice in Vermont this time of year. You could say that about Vermont any time of year, couldn't you? Jay's saying I'd woo North Carolina. We'll get to that in segment number 2. Segment number 2. Friend of the channel, Jared Jones, chiming in. He is in the house here tonight. Tony is in here as well. Florida State should be the number 1 target from the ACC. We'll get to that as well. We'll get to that here in segment 2. We'll get to that. More from Jay. Saw Notre Dame is leaving Under Armour early. What does that mean for Wisconsin and Northwestern? And then you assume Maryland as well. Yeah, these apparel deals. There's a lot going on at Notre Dame, right? They've got that upcoming NBC contract where they want $75 million. What are they getting right now? 25, 30? Maybe for the football deal where they get 6 or 7 games on NBC every year. It's a big jump. If they don't get that money from NBC, what happens next? What happens next? If they don't get what they want, and now they get 40, maybe they get 50, and maybe it's not quite what they're looking for, where they'd maybe make a significant more in the Big Ten. We're going to talk about the ACC and the rumbling of what's going on over there. Where does Notre Dame go from there? Jared, seeing Fox, CBS, NBC announcing Big Ten games got me excited as heck. Let's go over a few of them. We've got, this is just a no order in particular. It's just off the old noggin, just off the top of the brain. Ohio State and Michigan State will be in prime time on NBC. That's going to be a Big Ten Saturday night. I think the big announcement throughout all of this was the whiteout for Penn State is going to be Iowa at Penn State on CBS in prime time. In prime time is the key word there. Because you're going to see a lot, because CBS still has their SEC obligations in the mid-afternoon. there is going to be some overlap. You got to think between CBS and NBC in terms of some of these primetime games. Iowa and Penn State is good. It's the same week of Ohio State Notre Dame. That is going to be a banger of a week in terms of Big Ten college football. I am pumped up for that week. Pumped up. We're going to learn a lot about our Big Ten teams. Penn State and Ohio State in the East, and then Iowa in the West. Can Iowa go toe-to-toe with the East Division powers? Whiteout, Happy Valley, going to be tough for the Hawks. I'll say that as well. Tony chiming in. I know Jim Delaney, former commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, wanted his alma mater, North Carolina. I would guess the SEC, North Carolina. Once again, segment 2, we're going to talk about this. North Carolina is going to be fought over. The Tar Heels are a very valuable resource. They know it. That's why they're in the Magnificent Seven meetings. They know the value that they possess. Raleigh, growing. Charlotte, we know what kind of a market Charlotte, North Carolina is. North Carolina, we know how good they are at basketball. They're pretty good at football as well. They're going to be highly sought after. They're going to be fought over by the SEC and the Big Ten. They're going to be fought over. M. Goboski, Michigan fan. Pour one out for Sparty. Keon Coleman is headed to Tallahassee. That was announced a few hours before we came on the air here tonight. Keon, man, Florida State is building a heck of a football team. They are building a playoff dark horse down there in Tallahassee, and Keon Coleman's going to make them just that much better. Jared Jones wants to know what the heck is happening to Sparty. My initial impression, and I still stand by most of this impression, is things are declining in East Lansing, Michigan. Let's just say that. Things are declining in East Lansing. When I look at Michigan State, this is a team that needs to, I think it's still going to be a challenge for them to get to 6 wins. That is still going to be a challenge for Michigan State. I think their defense, this year, their defense might be. I'm not saying it is. Got to do a little bit more research. We'll do as this offseason progresses. We get closer to August and September. This defense might be one of the better defenses that they've had under Mel Tucker, and I sure hope so, because the defenses the last 2 years, even when they won 11 games, was not very good. Right? Jacoby Windman is back. Chris Bogle is back. Cal Halliday is back. Tomorrow, there is going to be a video on this channel talking about impact freshmen. I believe By Job, a 6'4", 230-pound edge rusher, could make a difference as a true freshman. I believe this front seven for Michigan State is going to be good. But I still haven't seen significant addition in terms of the wide receiver position through the portal. And we're pretty late in the spring version of the portal. So Trey Mosley is going to be, and his supporting cast, those are going to be the guys that they're going to have to trot out for on the edge right now. That's what I've heard. Only 9 years left for Mel Tucker on his deal. This is such a big year for Mel. You want to show a positive direction of your program. You've taken hits the last 2 seasons. You've taken hits. But where's it gonna go from here? You need to try to get to that bowl game. That's because they had a top 25 recruiting class in the country, 4th in the Big Ten. Mainly built on defense and mainly built on interior offensive linemen. Michigan State, maybe they're trying to be a more hard-nosed type of football team. And maybe we're going to see some of that really come out this year. We'll see. We'll see about Michigan State. We'll see. M. Goboski says, Stanford is the most valuable school on the West Coast for the Big Ten. I'm not sure about, I know that, here's the thing about the Bay Area, about Stanford and about Cal. I understand there's a large amount of alumni in that area. I understand the impact that of all the alumni and the tech industry in that area that exists with Stanford and with Cal. I understand all of that. And a lot of times when you say, well, if you say Stanford and Cal isn't valuable, they throw out the Rutgers argument. And that's always the counter when you say, well, someone is invaluable. Well, you're saying Rutgers was. Rutgers has the number one market in the country. Now, the Bay Area is a pretty good-sized market. It's not New York City, but it's still a pretty good-sized market right now. I just believe when I look at things from a Stanford and Cal perspective, and we'll get to this in segment 2 of the program tonight, would you rather have Stanford and Cal, or would you rather have Miami? We're talking markets now. Miami, Atlanta, Charlotte, southern markets right there, because you don't want to dilute the product. You had too many schools out west. You might not be able to add more schools out east. I think it's a gamble with Stanford and Cal. That's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. I can go back and forth on this a little bit. I can go back and forth. But they definitely fit in academics, research, that part of what the Big Ten wants. Market-wise, the Bay Area is a good market. I just don't know about their fan support. That's kind of one thing that some people have been turned off with Stanford and Cal. Tony mentioning market, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, and the Twin Cities. Twin Cities here. Buckshot Kid checking in here tonight. Landon Sports Network saying we need 4 non-conference games again. Those days are well behind us, I'm afraid. Those days we're only probably going to add more conference games, if anything. There was rumblings. Remember the Alliance? Remember that? That seems like a long time ago. There were rumblings where all of the Alliance conferences were going to go down to 8 conference games, and then they were going to add 1, maybe 2 Alliance games in the non-conference. ACC, Pac-12, Big Ten, ACC, that kind of thing. Obviously, those days are gone. Those days are long gone. Ryan checking in here tonight. He's hoping the Big Ten adds the schools from Bigfoot territory in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, and Oregon. Landon Sports Network. Why is everyone not putting Iowa football in the top 25? I think they'll make it to the Rose Bowl. Rose Bowl, I believe, is a playoff game this year, so that's the college football playoff. As much as Iowa has the potential to be a 10-win team this season. They do. I think it all depends on the sun. It all depends on bad luck Brian Ferentz. What's he going to do with this offense at Iowa? We know what the defense is going to do. We know the defense is going to be great. The ball Hawkeyes in the secondary are going to take the football away. But what's the defense going to do? This is a top 25 Iowa football team right now. If I were to rank a top 25 in the country, I'd probably put them in the top 25, probably towards the bottom right now, and watch them earn their way to the top, see if they can get a non-conference win in Ames at Iowa State. They weren't able to beat Iowa State at home last season. They're going to have opportunities to rise up before that game. Buckshot Kid, did you change your camera? It looks different. I white balanced it. What a concept. What a concept. Just changing the colors a little bit to try to make things pop a little bit more. Looked a little bit yellow in some of those last live streams and videos. M. Goboski saying, Michigan State don't want that Hoosier smoke. That Hoosier smoke. Man, that was a crazy game last season where Indiana was outgained and outplayed by Michigan State, but got to take care of the football. Got to find a way to win. Michigan State didn't do it. Cost them a shot at going to a bowl game. It's going to be very interesting when you look at Michigan State and what has happened at that program. That Indiana game, that could have made them. You get to a bowl game, you win a bowl game, 7-6, even 6-7, but 7-6 is a lot different than 5-7. A lot different. A lot different. A lot different. Do we have some Ducks fans? Got some Ducks fans in the house. Welcome to Big Ten Ted. Thanks for being aboard. Things go right this summer. You might be watching this channel a little bit more. Washington did make the playoff. I believe it was 2016. I think it was 2016 where they played Bama. For some reason, the score 24-7 sticks in my head, but it could have been a lot more lopsided than that. But yeah, Washington didn't fare well when they did get there. Chris Peterson was the head coach at that time. Tony chiming in. I heard the Pac-12 push back the timeline of their TV deal till July or August. I did hear an interview. I did read an article. Ray Anderson, who's the AD at Arizona State, says, all's hunky-dory here. We're fine. We're sticking together. But July and August is our timeline to get a deal done. How much further are they going to push back this timeline? How much further are they going to keep on kicking the can down the road? We're going to get to the start of the football season. There might not be a deal done with a year or less than a year until they got to figure things out. Eventually, some schools are going to get impatient. Who's going to get impatient first? Who knows? Is it going to be Colorado? Is it going to be Arizona? Oregon? Washington? Who's going to be impatient? Someone's going to jump at some time for some stability. Good stuff. Good stuff tonight. We got 2 more segments. We're going to get to 2 more segments, and we're going to open this thing up as well. Gerald McKinley checking in. Coach Pitch game. From Coach Pitch to Big Ten Ted Live. It's a seamless transition. Jared Jones, I can see the Big Ten getting shut out of Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Miami, so Notre Dame becomes a must. Notre Dame becomes a must. Why is it all of a sudden, I'll get to that maybe in segment 2, whereas why does SEC gets first pickings and the Big Ten is chopped liver? I think a lot of people might think that. A lot of people might think, well, the SEC, and I said this before, the SEC might protect their territory. But the Big Ten they're very valuable, and they're going to be sought for. There's going to be a lot of battles between the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're going to be even battles. John Berger checking in. It'll be 3 conferences, 6 teams each. It's the only things that make sense, according to John. According to John. Will it eventually take a Big Ten versus SEC super conference situation, AFC, NFC? That's been talked about before, where SEC and the Big Ten scoop up anything and everything they can get their hands on, and they secede and form their own deal where SEC playoffs, Big Ten playoffs meet in the Super Bowl of college football. Big Ten SEC champions play for the national championship. It's been talked about. I don't know how realistic that is, but man, the more, like if the Pac-12 dies, if the ACC dies, you got the Big 12 sitting there. Maybe it's all 3 conferences. Maybe the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10 all secede and form their own deal. At least on the football side of things. Here's John Berger. The problem is you can't have 12 good teams. Talked about that before. Which means somebody's going to drop. Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, Michigan. Historically, top 15 teams. I mentioned that before with your Rutgers, with your Indiana. With teams like that, like you're going to have those teams it's going to be harder and harder. It's going to get more difficult and more difficult to see this happen. How are they going to get to a bowl? How are these teams going to get to a bowl game? How is this going to happen? That's what I want to know. Can it happen? Can Rutgers, do they have a fighting chance? Or is it just, whatever. It's just going to be, you're going to be bound for 4. Was that last off season? Who knows? I might resurrect that video idea. Rutgers, Indiana, Northwestern, are schools like that doomed for 4 and 5 wins a year when you bring in all these other teams. I definitely think that's something to keep in mind. And what you mean? They're getting $100 million. They're able to build new buildings and facilities on campus for academic and athletic teams. Athletic things, I should say. Maybe they don't care as much. Who knows? More comments. We love to speculate. Said that at the top of the show. Until the Big Ten presidents formally extend the invitation, it's nothing more than speculation. And that's where we're at right now. We're speculating. We got to do something in the offseason, right? We got to talk about something. Conference realignment speculation. And throwing around different ideas is what can make the offseason entertaining. And it's fun to be able to look forward to these things and imagine what if where Oregon and Washington are in the Big Ten Conference. HG90 Dog coming in. The alliance was suspect from the start because it was an agreement. I remember watching this on Zoom. George Kliavkov, Jim Phillips, and Kevin Warren saying, well, it's an agreement. It's a gentleman's agreement. What? You don't put anything on paper, and this is what happens. The Big Ten goes into SoCal, and they grab USC and UCLA. The Pac-12 can't get a deal done. Half of the ACC is trying to explore getting out of the Grant of Rights. This is what happens, folks. This is what happens when you don't put stuff on paper. I remember the question, it was like, oh, does this guarantee you won't go after each other's members? And it was very no concrete answer. I'll just put it that way. Brian, could we see an Oregon-Washington announcement at Big Ten Media Days? It seems every year there's something big that happens then. I think the reason why it happens then is just because a lot of these university presidents, they're very busy during the school year. They do more than just talk about what conference they're going to go to. Okay, they're running a whole university, academic programs. Athletics are just a small fraction, I think, of what they deal with. When the school year ends, that's when these discussions really starts to heat up. And that's when, once June goes by, late July is usually when you have media days. Maybe it could happen during media days. Maybe. I'm not sure. That still is up in the air. I remember last year they talked about it a little bit at media. No, they didn't. Did they? Yeah, because I think I went to the basketball media days, and I think that's the first we talked about it. I think USC and UCLA joined after football. I'd have to go back and check. To see where the first comments came about USC and UCLA. All good stuff tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Good comments, good discussion here tonight. Illini for life. We got an Illinois fan in the house tonight. If you go to 10 conference games, stay with 12 overall games. Do some schools need to get out of non-conference contracts already scheduled? Would the conference help pay for that? You got to think that they would. They probably would have to get, because right now they'd only have to get out of one. The conference probably would have to do that. That you mentioned paying for those types of things as well. But you got to think maybe if the TV contract goes up, then it wouldn't be a huge deal. The more you get further down the road, the less there is in terms of concrete non-conference games. So hopefully it would just be a handful of games. But that's not as set in stone either. But yeah, you would need to get out of some conference games. Georgia and Oklahoma were able to get out of their non-conference game because they were both playing in the SEC. That's why when Washington got out of their series with Ohio State, a lot of people thought that signaled that Washington could be coming to the Big Ten Conference. That could still be the case. Not sure what the financial part of backing out of that one was. Wednesday night, Big Ten TED Live, talking all things Big Ten. Segment 1 in the book, talking about Oregon and Washington vetted and cleared. I still think that this is a ways away. If you guys are YouTube watchers and you love conference realignment, you probably watch college football's peak around the corner. I do get a lot of conference realignment insight and inspiration from Greg over there. He's breaking things down into Act 11 and Act 12. He's talking about June, late June. The Monty Show is another one that talks a lot about these kinds of things. So there's multiple sources out there for conference realignment, but they're looking. A lot of people that really are in the know. I am not one of those people, but a lot of people that are in the know right now are talking about late June, possibly into July, as maybe some timeline when some things could move and shake. So keep an eye on that timeline as we continue to progress here throughout this timeline. In the world of college football conference realignment, anything can happen at any given time. That's the beauty about all of this. All right, more comments. More comments here. All good stuff here tonight. All good stuff. Landon Sports Network talking about Oregon being good for track. They are a track blue blood. Blue blood, the school of Steve Prefontaine. Track blue blood. Check it out. Checking it out here on Big Ten 10. Checking out the live stream. Do you think the Oregon-Washington forced the ACC members to have an emergency meeting? I think these are isolated incidents. I think the ACC members have been meeting for some time. That's what I believe right now. I think these are isolated incidents. I think these are incidences that have different timelines and that are going to go in different directions. That's what I see. I don't think all of a sudden Oregon and Washington, there was a report of Brett McMurphy that came out, all of a sudden the ACC came in and, yeah, we should probably meet about this. I don't think that's how it went down. I don't think that's how this all came about. I think these are Oregon and Washington. You go back to last year, there was informal discussions between the Big Ten and Oregon, not at the president level, not at the commissioner level, but there were informal discussions with the Big Ten, with Oregon and Washington that were happening even last year. And now we fast forward to this year, and here we sit, and here we are. So, yeah, I don't think that those two are intertwined, but schools from either part of the country could be making their way together, so to speak. So to speak. Let's go take a look at some more comments here. More comments here. Landon Sports Network talking about minor league football. Get used to it. It's NIL. It's the NIL era. Everybody's on a one-year contract with the transfer portal. I was talking to a buddy of mine about there's a local college here, University of St. Thomas, that just went D1. Basketball players getting pecked and transferring to any which way. Get used to it. Everybody's on a one-year deal. You got to continue to recruit. You got to continue NIL. How about the announcement today of the college football video game? Everybody's getting FBS teams, players, schools going to be able to opt in and make money on the college football video game. That's great news. Everybody should be excited about this game coming down the pike in 2024. 2024 is going to be like a team that, or a year that we have never seen. Never seen. Some more comments from John Berger, I believe a resident Wisconsin fan. Big concerns about Tanner Mordecai. Mordecai did not do well against any average to above average defenses last year. He's put up big numbers the last 2 years at SMU. SMU played 5 teams that were decent last year. He also didn't play well in the spring game, threw 3 interceptions. Coming in, I love the acquisition of Tanner Mordecai. John comes in here with some facts, didn't play well, really lit it up and maybe padded his stats against the below average defenses in the American. That's a big thing for Wisconsin right now. How is Tanner Mordecai? When I looked at Tanner Mordecai, I thought, yeah, he's going to be able to transition, and he looks the part of a Big Ten quarterback. And maybe he could be a dark horse Heisman type of guy with this system that Wisconsin is bringing in. You know, the more time that continues to go by, the less sure. I was so sure about Wisconsin. February, March, those types of months before the spring game. I look at the spring game, and now maybe some things that I thought were sure, I'm having a little bit of doubts on. A little bit of doubts on when it comes to Wisconsin. Little bit of doubts right now. A little bit of doubts. Check it out. Regarding non-conference games, would USC stop the Notre Dame yearly game? I talked about that. Whereas if you go to 10 conference games, and that might be some of the pushback for your Iowas and your USCs that have those yearly conference games that you gotta absolutely must play every year. USC, Notre Dame, I gotta play 10 Big Ten games, one of the best leagues in America, and then I gotta turn around and I still gotta play Notre Dame. You bet your bottom dollar I'm playing an FCS team. I don't know if USC has played a lot of FCS teams throughout the years, but you bet I'm taking it easy one of those weeks. You bet. You bet your butt I'm taking it easy one of those weeks. Iowa's another example as well. Anthony chiming in. There's a good part of me that would love for the power conferences to all make it to 16 teams. Yes, I do not realize. Here's the thing about that is I was telling on the way up to a wedding, talking to my wife about all of this, and I'm saying, and she's like, oh, shouldn't they work together? And I said, yes, absolutely they should work together. But they don't. They all act independently. Imagine the NFC North and the AFC West acting independently. That's what it's like. The NCAA is the NFL, right, in this particular scenario. But the more you really dive in and the more you really do a deep dive, conferences acting independently will always act in their best interest. The Big Ten doesn't care about the SEC. The Big Ten doesn't care about the ACC. The Big Ten doesn't care about the Big 12. And they shouldn't, as long as the model is the way it is right now. There's no benefit to work together. Right now in the queue of possible video ideas, I'm going to be talking about should the SEC and the Big Ten work together in college football playoff talks. That's going to be an interesting topic later on this offseason. Should they work together? COVID 2020 proved to us when we all needed to get on the same page. Nobody could do it. Now I understand different states had different restrictions and regulations at that time, and that's a totally different issue that we will never cover here on Big Ten Ted. And that's, I think, what made it difficult, right? The state of California and the state of Florida couldn't have more opposite deals during 2020. And I think that's what made it difficult, but we couldn't agree. We couldn't agree on scheduling then, and we're not going to agree on things down the road. That's just the fact of the matter. That's just the fact of the matter. Yeah, not a lot of Iowa State fans in here. I see your comment there, Sunshine Design. You know, I was looking at, it seems like I look at the AAU schools map every 2 weeks. Found out a month or two ago, Iowa State no longer AAU apparently. Right? So the very slim 0.01% chance they had to get in the Big Ten is now 0.00 because they're no longer an AAU member. Found that out. I don't know when that happened. Maybe it happened last year. I don't know when that happened, but it happened. Some good topics, some good comments here on Big Ten Ted Live tonight. Really appreciate everybody for coming along for the ride here tonight. If it's your first time stopping by here, consider subscribing so you get up to date. We do videos, we do live streams, we do all sorts of stuff every day during the week, and more content coming up here later on during the season. Illini for Life chiming in once again. With more TV networks in schools, do you see an increase on games played on Friday night? I have covered this before. When did I cover it? A couple of weeks ago? Maybe a month ago on a live stream I talked about I would love, and I don't think this is going to happen right now, but I would love an Amazon Prime live stream. Friday night. Gets big time promotion on their NFL show on Thursday night. Comes into Friday night. But I believe there are, I said a week or two ago, 5, I think, Friday night games this season. I think a lot of them are going to be on Peacock. And I talked about this in a video. Go check it out a couple of weeks ago on the channel, where I said, if Peacock streams their 8 exclusive games on Saturdays, they're going to get buried, because Peacock is not really a part of a live TV package, whether you're watching on a cable box or something like YouTube TV or Sling TV. You got to go out and you got to search Peacock. You got to go to the app on your Roku or wherever you're watching it on, and it makes it harder to find. It makes it harder and more difficult to find. So I think that's the problem with Peacock right now. So that's why I think going on a Friday night would really help them out. Peacock, to be able to be isolated on a Friday night. Wisconsin-Purdue is on a Friday night. You look at Nebraska and Illinois is on a Friday night. Those are games that you put them on an island, you isolate them on a Friday night, maybe, just maybe, that's enough to really have those games stand out a little bit more. Peacock on Friday night. So go check that video out if you haven't already. HD90 Dog. Check it in. My computer would catch up and display the comment. There it is. The only way I see the Big Ten and the SEC working together is if they became the 2 mega conferences and wanted to shuttle the rest of the NCAA for the Natty. Is if they separate and form their own association. That's the way it would be. That's the way it would be. I think that's the only way that this would happen, is if the Big Ten and the SEC separate, form their own association, and there's some sort of agreement that this would happen, that they'd work together on certain things. John Berger, more about Wisconsin. It seems like there's a reason some of these 4-star guys didn't make it at their schools and transferred. CJ Williams, Nick Evers. I look at Nick Evers. Is it Evers or Evers? I don't know. I've heard it pronounced both ways. He was on what? The 3rd team? I think, because they had Mordecai was the one at the spring game. They had Braden Locke, I think right now appears to have an edge over Evers at Wisconsin. So I don't know what happened. That's what happens when you're rebuilding a program and you want to try to install what you want to do. I know it's hard, but you need to try to get the personnel that you want in there. And now, how do you do that? You do it via the transfer portal. And sometimes that can hit Michigan State. Sometimes it can miss. Last year, Nebraska. All good stuff here tonight in the live chat. Very much appreciate everybody for coming by here tonight. Every Wednesday night, it's Big Ten Ted Live, except for maybe next Wednesday. Might be working next Wednesday. So that might get shifted to Tuesday, or it might get shifted to Thursday. So stay tuned to Twitter and the channel for that to see what day Big Ten Ted Live is going to be on as we continue to go throughout here. So thanks everybody for tuning in here tonight. We've gone through segment 1. Oregon and Washington. I think it's time to shift on over to segment 2. And this is when it's going to get real hot. All right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Magnificent Seven. Let's talk about it. Miami, Florida State, Clemson, NC State, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech. 7 schools, according to Brett McMurphy, that have been meeting by themselves outside of the ACC. Outside of the Atlantic Coast Conferences. They're talking about how do we circumvent this grant of rights? Can we get past the grant of rights? They've been talking about maybe changing the revenue distribution model in the ACC. Maybe something as so far as crazy and outlandish as dissolving the conference, and going our separate ways. Okay, so when we talk about the Magnificent Seven and how it could eventually impact the Big Ten down the road, the way it's going to impact the Big Ten is that there are markets, there are teams, there is value within these teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference where things could turn out real good for some of these Big Ten schools, being able to go into South Florida and Atlanta and places like that and adding those types of teams. But here's the deal. Here's what's happening with the ACC. Right now, I don't believe the conference is going to dissolve. I don't believe Armageddon is near for the ACC. Some people might think that. I do not believe that's going to happen. But I think what they're about to do is going to cause maybe their undoing. Unequal revenue distribution, right? When we look at the ACC meetings, day one, they come out, everybody's got their heads down, everybody's, walking out, Jim Phillips and the administrators and all this stuff, you're walking out. Day two, lot different tune from these ACC meetings. Lot different tune in the Atlantic Coast Conference, where they're optimistic. We'll work it out. We're not going to be the Big Ten or the SEC, but we're going to hang around number 3. And we're going to hang around right there, and we're going to make it happen. An unequal revenue distribution model for the ACC is great for the Big Ten. It's great for the SEC because they know at the latest 2036 they could be having some new members. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's dive into it a little bit. Unequal revenue distribution model. Apparently, they're talking about different ways that this could happen. Success on the field would equal more money. You're not getting any more than $5 or $10 million a year. You're just not. What happens at Florida State and Clemson and Miami, the powers that be in the ACC? What happens if they get a bunch of money and they get $5 to $10 million extra? Okay. And they've said it. They've said it coming out that says it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. We're still not going to be able to compete with them, but maybe it'll give us a fighting chance. What happens when those schools are making, now instead of $40 million, they're making $50 million? I don't know what the yearly payout is for the ACC right off the top of my head. What happens instead of that? Now Pitt and Louisville and Wake Forest and Boston College and Syracuse, if something goes up, something must go down. And those teams are going to earn less revenue unless ESPN brings in more money but that's not going to happen. You know why? Because ESPN just dropped $20 million a year on the Pat McAfee show. This is a quick sidebar. If I'm the Pac-12 and if I'm the ACC, out of all the variables at ESPN, a company that's been cutting jobs and having mass layoffs, I get the emails from Bob Iger because I've worked for ESPN one time last year, a Minnesota United game, worked in the ESPN truck. So now I get these ESPN emails from Bob Iger. He's talking about massive layoffs for ESPN. And now the network that's supposedly in financial trouble, which I don't know if that's completely accurate, just dropped $20 million a year on a talk show instead of live sports programming. Now it's a talk show that's very popular. I'll say that. $20 million a year when that money might have gone to the ACC. Maybe not the ACC, but more the Pac-12 than maybe the ACC. That's a quick sidebar. But let's reel it back in to an unequal revenue distribution model. What happens when Pitt and Louisville and all these schools make $5 to $10 million less? Now they're making less than they did before. Now they're making less than schools out in the Pac-12 or the Big 12. Sorry, not the Pac-12, the Big 12. Well, it could be the Pac-12 too. But the Big 12. Now all of a sudden, Pitt and Louisville, Boston College, now all of a sudden you might say, well, I'm Boston College. I'm a team in a major market. Pitt may be less of a major market, but I want to play West Virginia on a yearly basis again. You just keep going down the schools. Why wouldn't I just go to the Big 12 where I know I can make X amount of dollars every year? Why wouldn't I just do that? And now there's this revenue distribution. I don't know what I'm going to get every year. Now it's going to be within $5 or $10 million. So it's not going to be like 20, or it's not going to be a huge disparity. But that's the thing about this uneven revenue distribution model is now you're getting into a situation like the Big 12 where you've got power players and you've got schools possibly calling the shots. You have a possible inmates running the asylum type of deal where Texas and a little bit of Oklahoma, but mostly Texas in the Big 12 really held a stranglehold over the future of the Big 12. They held the future in their hands in the late 2000s and the early 2010s when the possible Pac-16 was talked about. They said, let's stay home in the Big 12 because we want to retain the Longhorn Network. Okay? If you give if Florida State, if Miami, if Clemson, the teams that you know are probably going to be pretty good, you give them that power, they're going to exert their power over the rest of the conference because that's what they want. That's what they want. They want that more money to try to compete. Unequal revenue distribution model is a Band-Aid that will eventually peel off on its own. A Band-Aid that's on there now, and it seems like it's tight on your arm, and well, I don't feel like I'm bleeding anymore. But once the Band-Aid continues to peel off and it continues to wear off, you look down, you see that scar, and you're like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Unequal revenue distribution model, I just don't see it. It might work in the short term for the teams at the top, but across the board, I think it's going to lead to the demise, possibly, of the Atlantic Coast Conference. So, the ACC needs one school, in theory, from all that I've heard. Now, there's some legal stuff that goes to this. One more school, 8 out of 14/15, if you count Notre Dame, to dissolve the conference. I will say, in terms of that, if you want to dissolve the conference, everybody's got to know where they're going. Virginia Tech's got to have a plan. Virginia, everybody that votes to dissolve, they got to know where they're going. They got to have an agreement that says, I'm going to the Big 10, I'm going to the SEC, I'm going to the Big 12, I'm going to wherever. They got to have it in writing. Because if it's not ironclad and it's not sure, it's not worth the risk. Because if they vote to dissolve the ACC and all of a sudden Virginia doesn't get an invite to the Big 10, now what do? Now you're stuck. It needs to be for sure. I think that would be far down the road. If unequal revenue distribution model doesn't work, that could be down the road. I don't think that's going to happen right now in the ACC. Okay, so I talked before about the ACC and what it provides. And what I referenced Stanford and I referenced Cal. It says, well, no, not right now for Stanford and Cal. You got to look to the ACC. You got to look to Miami, Florida State. You got to look to all these schools because there are good schools out there. There are great schools out there. Not all of them AAU, but there's schools like Miami and Florida State that compare in some categories academically to maybe your Marylands and other schools out there. Other schools out there. So let's talk about it. Let's go a little bit deeper into this. When do these media, this is why I'm going to really just double down on why this ACC deal is just, it's just not it. It's just not it. The SEC deal ends in 2034. It's a 10-year deal. It ends just in time for the SEC to go out and invite some teams to come on over after 2036. The Big 12 deal ends in 2031. And the Big 10 deal ends in 2030. I want to focus on those two, and especially you know what it is. This ain't Big 12 Tommy. This is Big 10 Ted. This ain't SEC Steve. This is Big 10 Ted. So we're going to talk about the Big 10. The Big 10 already is leaps and bounds, doubling in some areas, doubling the revenue that the ACC is. Then they're going to get a new deal in 2030. And then they're going to increase that revenue even more. And that's not talking about if they increase the revenue in Oregon and Washington, possibly come in 2024. Like, the Big Ten is going to be so far ahead of the ACC from a revenue standpoint. SEC might, because they're going to be making towards the back end of that deal. I looked it up. They're going to be making around $100 million per school. It's going to be almost double for the SEC. But the Big Ten, it could be $100 million difference, possibly. Maybe not that. Maybe 75, maybe $100 million towards the back end. The Big Ten could sign a new deal in 2030. It could be a short deal to 2034. It could be a 5-year deal to 2035. And then they could sign another deal before that original ACC deal expires. It seemed like a good idea at the time to lock things in. But I think what we're finding out from a conference perspective is you need between probably 5 and 10-year deals. What did the ACC sign? They signed what? Was it a 20-year deal? Maybe at the time. It looked like security. But maybe security isn't what everybody wanted. Now everybody's looking at it, well, maybe security isn't the best thing. Maybe I want to go somewhere else. Maybe I want to upgrade. Because these administrators are right at the Clemsons, at the Florida States, that have been speaking out. They're right. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to, especially in a 12-team playoff era, they're going to separate themselves even more, folks. They're going to continue to keep on going out and going out and going out. And the teams that are in the Big Ten and the teams that are in the SEC, as they continue to grow, the gap is going to become that much bigger. It's going to become that much bigger. All right. So we talked about these deals and how we could see another deal. The Big 12, 2031. You could see another Big 12 deal. I believe that if the Big 12 in 2031, in about 8 years, they do another deal starting in 2032, they might, we talk about the ACC saying we want to stay the third most in terms of revenue. Now the Big 12 might swoop in with a new deal in 2032 and say, we just overtook you. And now they go down to fourth. Now there's going to be some movement. So I'm going to go down. I don't think you're going to see teams in one. Like, I don't think you're going to see both Florida schools go to the same league. I don't think you're going to see both North Carolina schools. You keep on going down the pike. I think it's going to divide because I think the Big Ten and the SEC both have strong arguments for these conferences, for teams that go out. So I'm just going to quickly go over what I think. I mean, we're still a long ways away from this happening. For the Big Ten. Actually, before the Big Ten, I'm going to talk about the SEC. I'm going to talk about the SEC first. Florida State, Clemson. I think those are the two main targets for the SEC. I think Clemson is a no-brainer. That is not a Big Ten target. That is not a Big Ten destination. I think Clemson to the SEC makes a lot of sense. The Miamis and the Florida States, I believe, could go in any direction. Any direction. I believe Miami and Florida State both have something to offer. I just think Florida State maybe has more to offer. They have a rivalry built in with Florida that's already played the last weekend of the season. And I'm just going to say from the Big Ten standpoint, and I'll get to what the Big Ten might add here in just a little bit, Miami is a hell of a recruiting ground. That's a little teaser. I've got NC State to the SEC, and I've got Virginia Tech or Virginia to the SEC as well. Let's go to the Big Ten, because that's what we all came here to see, right? Miami. Can you imagine having South Florida and Miami, Southern California and LA, both as recruiting pipelines and recruiting grounds in your league? That's pretty darn good right there. Miami, academically, they're right on the border right there with AAU, right? Florida State is kind of in that area as well. I look at Georgia Tech next. Georgia Tech carries Atlanta. I know Atlanta's a big Bulldog town, but at least having a presence in Atlanta. You have a presence in Miami, you have a presence in Atlanta. That's pretty good. That's pretty good for having a presence. Now the Big Ten has a presence in the Southeast. Now they can compete. Now they can play with some of the recruiting down there. I look North Carolina. I think academically for North Carolina they fit in. The Big Ten is a better basketball league than the SEC. I think they fit in a little bit better there. I think North Carolina seems like a better fit for the Big Ten. And then you go to their final one. Notre Dame or Virginia. If Notre Dame wants to, be Notre Dame, if they want to Notre Dame this whole situation up, then okay, we'll go and get Virginia. But the fearsome foursome of Miami, Georgia Tech and Atlanta, North Carolina is near Raleigh, but I think it could also carry Charlotte. And Notre Dame, big time value. That's why you need to keep your eye on the East. That's why you need to be ready to pounce at a moment's notice. I'm going to quote a line from my favorite movie, Jurassic Park, from the great Sam Neill, playing the great Dr. Alan Grant. T-Rex doesn't want to be fed. She wants to hunt. The Big Ten needs to be the hunter. They always need to have their hunter attitude on. They need to be ready to hunt at all times. I know we don't want to be responsible for raiding the Pac-12. You need to do what's in the best interest of you. The T-Rex out in the forest needs to hunt. It needs to worry about, am I hungry or am I not? It needs to do what's best for the T-Rex and the T-Rex nest. And that's what the Big Ten needs to do. The Big Ten, I believe, needs to be aggressive. The Big Ten needs to go out on a limb and continue to progress and increase the viewership of their league because, man, they've got an NFL model going. Kevin Warren started it. Tony Petitti might be taking it in an even bigger direction with what's happening. We don't know where Tony Petitti is going to go. We know as a TV executive and relationships with these networks, he's going to continue. He's going to continue to try to grow the television aspect of the Big Ten Conference. The Big 12. I'll just throw that in there just because. Duke. I can see Duke going to the Big 12. Basketball, right? It's a great basketball league in the Big 12. I can see Boston College. How about Pitt? How about Syracuse? How about Louisville? How about Louisville in there as well? Let's rekindle some of these Big East rivalries. Like West Virginia, they were such on an island, in the Big 12 over the last few years, ever since they joined. Let's see some of those Big East rivalries. They got Cincinnati back in there. Let's see Louisville and Cincinnati for the Keg and Ales. West Virginia and Pitt in the backyard brawl. Let's see these be Big 12 games every year. Syracuse and Boston College have a Northeast rivalry, a series. I think there's possibilities. There's opportunities. I know the Big East was not the best conference. In fact, it was the lowest, but man, was it entertaining. I loved watching Big East football. I know they had a lot of weekday night games to try to isolate themselves. And man, they remember what Rutgers was good in the mid-2000s. Ray Rice and Mike Teal had some good teams out there. The Big East was fun to watch. Big East was fun to watch back in the day. I know this is Big Ten Ted, but I'm just going to quickly wrap things up here on this segment with the Big East. I remember there was a lot of memories from my childhood I remember about college football. There is very few memories that stick out into my head more than West Virginia in a position to play for a national championship in 2007. Pat White, Steve Slayton was Noel Devine in the backfield as well. Fantastic offense with Rich Rodriguez. And they play, I believe, at home against Pitt, a Dave Wannstedt coach Pitt team, and 13-9. The explosive offense gets shut down by Pitt, and it costs them a shot to play for a national title. The very next year, Rich Rodriguez heads out to become the head coach at Michigan. As they say, the rest is history. The other game, I'm just going to briefly mention this before I get to some comments here. I'm seeing some good comments, some good talking points that we can talk about. Notre Dame and USC in 2005. I remember it so vividly. So vividly. Watching the local high school play in their homecoming game in an afternoon on a Saturday. Someone comes up to me and says, Notre Dame and USC is playing. Tom Zibikowski just took a punt to the house. Well, we got to rush home and we got to see the rest of this Notre Dame USC game. And instant classic. I still find it ridiculous that 2005 featured two of the best games in college football history. Notre Dame and USC, and then Notre Dame and Texas in the national championship. Thanks, everybody, for being along for the ride here tonight. Let's get to some comments. Let's get to some comments here maybe about the ACC and about all this stuff. John, love your show, Ted. We're never going to talk about that. We stick with the Big Ten, and we stick with football. Every now and then I'll go cover the Big Ten Women's Basketball Championship, but you know what it is. You know what it is. Greg, your voice screams, I am a sports broadcaster. I'm energetic, not apologetic. I probably sound like this because this is how I talk, by the way. This is my training. I started in radio when I was 19 years old, all the way back in 2010, which is now 13 years ago, which is crazy to me. Worked in radio, worked in TV for a long time. Still work in TV, but I'm on the other side of the camera now. I'm not in front of the camera. I'm behind the camera, so to speak. So over time, maybe my voice has become more announcery. So that's just where we are right now. Jared, appreciate that. Appreciate the kind words, friend of the channel. Jared Jones. Sunshine Design thinks the Magnificent Seven breaks the Grant of Rights and frees Notre Dame. Notre Dame could be a big part of this. Could they be the eighth vote to dissolve the conference? Could be. Could be. Danny McNerney, new subscriber. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for joining the Big Ten TED family. With college sports changing, whether we like it or not, and that's the important part, I would like the Big Ten to become a national sports brand, coast to coast. Try to add A&M, Baylor, Florida State, North Carolina. If you're going A&M, you might as well throw in Florida. Florida's AAU. You could try to go in. You could try to do that. Texas A&M is a good one. I see A&M and Baylor maybe as a pair. Battle of the Brazos, yearly game once again. Florida State, North Carolina. The Big Ten is not just going to keel over and let the SEC get whatever they want. The Big Ten's going to be in the room, and the Big Ten's going to have a seat at the table, and they're going to have the discussion. Jared Jones, very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you for your continued support of the channel. Great show as always. Very appreciated. I love coming on Wednesdays and engaging with everybody. Of course, the uploaded videos, spent a lot of time on those. But it's good to engage. It's good to go back and forth. If you disagree with me, great. If you agree with me, great. It's great to go back and forth with the Big Ten community. So very much appreciate the super chat. Great way to support the channel and continue to grow the channel as well. I'm able to kind of put more effort into it when I get see things like super chat. So very much appreciate that. HD90 Dog, I give Jim Delaney a lot of credit for seeing all this coming. He secured Rutgers in Maryland for TV sets, not the programs. And now LA market. LA, I believe, is a combination of everything. They've got a football blue blood. They got a basketball blue blood. They've got one of the top markets in the country. It's freaking Hollywood. It's LA. It's LA. Like, that speaks for itself. You look at the recruiting market, Southern California is as good as it gets when it comes to football recruiting. LA was the total package. But Jim Delaney saw it. He saw the vision well before that with the Big Ten Network as well. And then once the Big Ten Network launched, he wanted to grow the Big Ten Network out to the East Coast. New York City, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. Jim Delaney was indeed a visionary. Indeed a visionary. HG90 Dog, more from him. It was smart signing the short TV deal because once the dust settles, they're going to want to demand a lot more money. Short deals allow you to continue to raise the price of your content as you continue to go. You lock into a 20-year deal like the ACC. What you're paying for TV rights now, like 2036 compared to 2016. Imagine college sports. Close your eyes and imagine in 2036, 13 years from now. We just started transfer portal. We just started NAL. Big Time Conference realignment. Nationwide expansion. What is college football going to look like in 2036 compared to what it looked like back in 2016? Completely different. Completely different. And you need, as a conference, you need to be able to change with the times. Your revenue needs to be able to adapt with the times. The ACC, they locked themselves in to a 2016 telephone booth. That's what they did. And they didn't look forward as to what might happen in 2036. Other conferences maybe allowed some room for growth. John Berger with some predictions. Clemson, Miami, Florida State. Move to the ACC. It just makes sense. Florida, Florida State, Miami, Florida State, South Carolina, Clemson. I see what, and I said that before during some shows before. It says the SEC is going to want to protect their territory. They're going to want to protect the Big Ten from getting in there. But the Big Ten is going to have a seat at the table. The Big Ten is going to have an argument. They're going to be making the same, if not more money. They're going to have a nationwide footprint. Okay, and the SEC, now, I don't want to use this as a cop-out, but the SEC has some of the best programs in the country. You look at Alabama, you look at Georgia, you look at Tennessee now is really coming onto the scene over there. It's a tough league to be in. Texas A&M is kind of finding that out as well. Florida a little bit is kind of finding that out, but the South Carolina is kind of coming on a little bit here now. So maybe they want to go to the Big Ten where maybe they view they have a better shot. But now more schools like that come over to the Big Ten, and it's going to become just as tough as a league as the Southeastern Conference. A lot of people think Southern schools to the SEC. Donnie chiming in response to John Berger. I think you're right, but I'd love to have Florida State in the Big Ten. Here's what I think about Florida. Florida State and Miami. Miami is a great market for recruiting. It's just a great market to be in. Florida State, I believe, is the bigger program. I believe Florida State can have more success. You look at Miami, they had a couple of decent years under Mark Richt. Was that 2016, 17, 18, somewhere in there? You know, the turnover chain years over there before Manny Diaz became the head coach after Mark Richt, retired. I wouldn't mind Miami. Miami, other than those Mark Richt years, it's been ever since like 2004, 2003, 2004. It's been a rough go for the Miami Hurricanes. This is just not as relevant a program as it used to be back in their heyday, back in the day. It's just not there. That's why Florida State has more recent success. And we talked about it earlier in the show with the addition of Keon Coleman and what they're building up. Mike Norvell, when he got hired from Memphis, I thought he was a solid hire. I don't know if I thought he would make Florida State a potential playoff contender this quick. Jared Jones, we talk about California dreaming. He's East Coast dreaming. Notre Dame, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina. That is packing a punch. Packing a punch right there. 2 schools in Florida, 1 in North Carolina. That's a pretty big punch right there. But I got to think one of those schools Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, it's hard for me to imagine all three of those teams going to the same conference, whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten. Jared also chiming in, thinking the Notre Dame, Oregon, Washington, and Stanford could possibly join the league as well. I don't think you need two teams in the Bay Area. I'll say that. You don't need Cal and Stanford, and you're taking Stanford. Jason Noun, I love everybody's opinion. Love, hey, which way are we going to go with the ACC and the Pac-12? Our first two segments in the books, and now we're speculating. And now we're going back and forth. Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, and Virginia. That would be a fantastic combination. A great combination. Clemson to the SEC. You could add NC State to the SEC. You could add Virginia Tech to the SEC. There's still maybe things out there, but the Big Ten in this scenario capitalizes and they get the prize. Duke isn't dropping football. They're not dropping football. They're not in that dire. They're not like a UConn, even though UConn has been improving under Jim Mora. They're not dropping football. Football drives so much revenue. Even if you're Duke, even if you're that good at basketball, football still drives the bus. You still need football. If Duke drops football, goes. I can see Duke joining the Big Ten. Duke would be a pair with North Carolina. I don't know if Duke really stands on its own right now. You talk about independence, and that's a very interesting thing to talk about as well. With all these conferences, you could there's a possibility. Say you say Oregon and Washington go, Colorado and Arizona go to the Big 12. What happens if teams go independent and they all make kind of scheduling arrangements with each other? Like, let's just throw out something. Let's throw out a Notre Dame, Stanford, Cal, Duke. You see they're all academically prestigious, and then you kind of throw in others. What if Wake Forest and Louisville, and what if they go independent? And there's a possibility when all this breaks down, I talk about those schools in the Northeast, those former Big East schools could become Big East schools once again and be independent in football, have scheduling arrangements with all those Big East teams. You could even throw UConn in there as well, and then they would join the Big East, which of course doesn't support football anymore. They're mainly basketball and kind of everything else. Jason Noun making his opinion known. Love to hear everybody's opinion on who they think is going where. Notre Dame, Florida State, Miami, Virginia to the Big Ten. Ooh, that packs a punch. But Jason is saying North Carolina goes to the SEC with Clemson, NC State, Virginia Tech. That's a scenario I would not disagree with. But that scenario right there, definitely the Big Ten is the winner. And maybe, just maybe, it could put the Big Ten on the level. Like you had Notre Dame, you had Florida State, you had Miami. Now you're starting to make up some ground. I don't think that the SEC is so worried about the number of teams. I think the SEC is willing to stay at 16. They might go to 18, things like that. I don't know if they're going to get to 20, 22, 24 teams. They're not going to add teams just to add teams. They know what they are. They know what their value is. Thanks, everybody, for coming along for the ride here tonight on Big Ten TED Live. More comments. From not me, well, then if it's not me, then who is it? Big Ten having a footprint in Florida is big. Man, they want that really bad. They want to go into the South. I'm not sure where they stand quite with Georgia Tech and Atlanta. I think Florida is a much bigger deal than Atlanta, obviously, and Georgia Tech. And I think it's possible that North Carolina is a bigger deal than Georgia Tech, even though their market, maybe Charlotte and Raleigh, isn't what Atlanta is. But it's still very important. But Florida, I think, is the big piece. The thinker is thinking. I think, hey, the thinker is thinking. What a concept. Oregon is huge, way bigger than UCLA. There were rumors. I haven't been able to confirm these, but there were rumors that said the Big Ten originally wanted USC and Oregon. But then Fox said we wanted to own LA because the Fox is based in LA. So that's why USC and UCLA got the nod and Oregon did not. They all might get in the conference eventually, but that's just what I heard. John Berger, Duke is a good fit for the Big Ten. Okay, football. They went 9-4 last year. Best basketball phenomenally academically. Duke is solid, but you got to think Duke football in the Big Ten is going to. I think North Carolina is a better. I feel overall North Carolina is maybe a little bit better. But I see the argument you're making for Duke. I think Duke's a little bit better academically than North Carolina. Basketball, they're a little bit better. Good argument for Duke. Maybe Duke pairs with North Carolina. HD90 Dog, as I understand it, you said there was a fallback, a little bit of an alternate take. I mentioned USC and Oregon here. HD90 Dog thinks initially it was supposed to be USC and Notre Dame as an answer to Texas and OU to the SEC, but Notre Dame balked again. Remember, Notre Dame turned down the Big Ten in 1999, and then I believe there was one more time, and possibly here. But the thing with Notre Dame is they're locked into this ACC deal. They're locked in there. So. Jason, now I'm thinking hockey only for Boston College. I don't think they're leaving the bean pot. I don't think you're leaving Hockey East. I don't think you're leaving playing the games with BU, and you're just not leaving the Northeast. The Big Ten has become a very good hockey conference, but the Northeast is, when you look at the true hotbed for college hockey, the Northeast and the Bean Pot is one of them, and another one is where this show and where this channel originates from, the state of Minnesota. Jeremy Jarrett speaking for us all. He's ready for college football. I am ready for college football. I'm ready for big-time games on CBS. I'm ready for big-time games on NBC. I'm ready for big noon Saturday. Kicking things off at 11 a.m. every Saturday on Fox. I'm ready for Big Ten football. I'm excited to see how the media deal really works out in year number one. Year number one. Thanks, everybody, for coming along for the ride here tonight. Big time movement in the live chat tonight. Dylan Vance chiming in. The Pac-12 is nearing the end. It's coming to an end. It's quite possible. It's quite possible. I want to see where things turn out. I'm going to have my eye on Oregon and Washington. I'm really starting to pay attention a lot to what's happening in the Pac-12 because it affects the future of the Big Ten Conference. Here's the thing I didn't mention, and I was going to mention it, but now I'm going to mention it. Oregon and Washington, I'm thinking about this selfishly, right? If the Big Ten can act in its own interest, I can act in my own interest. The Big Ten TED can act in its own interest as a channel. USC and UCLA, adding teams to the conference benefits the exposure of this channel. New fans come aboard, new people interested in the Big Ten, the fans from Southern California, fans from Oregon, fans from Washington. Selfishly, yes, I want to see the Big Ten expand. When the Big Ten expands, I expand. So, so I'm on board, I guess, in one part with expansion. I think it benefits. If there's an SEC specific channel out there adding Texas and Oklahoma, big time for that. Big time for that. And then you look at it on a much larger scale in the Big Ten Network. Getting the Big Ten Network into LA and getting those eyeballs in Los Angeles on the Big Ten. Benefits a lot of people. Benefits a lot of people. Jeremy Jarrett, you think the Big Ten is going to be powerful this year? Abso-freaking-lutely. In segment number 3, we're going to get to the depth of the Big Ten, and we're going on an hour and 40 minutes right now. But I'm going to keep on going as long as you guys are bringing the heat in the chat tonight. As long as you guys are bringing the heat, I'm going to keep on going because this is a really good show. You guys have brought some really good talking points here tonight. John Berger, Rutgers and Maryland are a bust. Kick them to the curb. I don't think Maryland's a bust. And I wouldn't call Rutgers a bust either. You got to, when you look at Maryland and Rutgers, On the field performance is just a piece to the pie. We know Rutgers and Maryland. This was said by a commenter before. Rutgers and Maryland weren't added because they were stout on the field. Rutgers most years struggled to get the bowl eligibility in the Big East. Like, Maryland in the ACC was fine. You know? I think what we need to look at and what we need to realize that was a markets. That was all markets. That was all big population areas. New York City, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, DMV. That was all that was. Getting the Big Ten Network, expanding the Big Ten Network to the East Coast. Speaking of Maryland, friend of the channel, Crab Cakes and Football, a Maryland fan, joining us here tonight. Top targets for the Big Ten in this order: Notre Dame, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina. You got Oregon and Washington down there. But this is a very interesting way to look at it. It's a very from 10,000 feet type of way to look at it. Notre Dame number 1, I agree with that. I could go 2A and 2B for Miami and Florida State. Clemson, it's hard for me because they're going to the SEC. I just don't see them as a fit for the Big Ten right now. North Carolina above Washington and Oregon is interesting, but I don't necessarily disagree with it. I think that's a pretty solid list. I think there's a lot of A's and B's, like Miami and Florida State could maybe swap. Maybe, North Carolina and the Washington-Oregon tandem, I think could be debated, but I see where you're going with North Carolina and what they provide. Jason Noun, it's too bad the Big Ten is snobby about academics, right? They're one of those like the Pac-12, like the ACC. They value academics and research. Arizona State is a fast-growing state with good recruiting grounds and a close travel partner for USC and UCLA. Yeah, Arizona State is one of those schools to keep an eye on. Because recently in Big 12 expansion talks, it's been Colorado and it's been Arizona. Before it was the Four Corner schools, and it could still be the Four Corner schools. But recently it's Colorado and Arizona. Where does Arizona State grow in all of this? They're growing. We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. Arizona State is a growing school. I will say this about Arizona State. Great broadcasting and journalism program. The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism out there at Arizona State. They produce a lot of good reporters and young anchors and people like that. So great program there. Let's see what else we got going on. Good stuff in the comments here tonight. Thanks everybody for coming aboard and having a nice discussion here tonight. Good discussion on a lot of great fronts. A lot of great fronts. Walnut 412, he disagrees that adding teams make it tougher on Indiana and Rutgers. Nothing is worse than the current situation of playing OSU. I see what you're saying. I think I see what you're saying. Where if we're going away from divisions, that's going to help a little bit. But as long as you keep on adding teams that are significantly better than the Indianas and the Rutgers, which is your Oregons, which is your Washingtons, which is teams like that, as long as you keep on adding, it continues to put them down the pecking order. Okay, if Rutgers and Indiana, I think they've got a fighting chance in a sixth, but that's what I'm saying. The more teams you add at the top of that tier 2, the more teams and the more girth that you get in the torso of the Big Ten, that you get in the middle of the Big Ten, the teams that are down, right? When we talk about a 3-7-7 or a 3-6-6 scheduling model, it just becomes tougher the better teams that you add. That's where I stand on that particular issue. But I understand what you're saying, that maybe you're saying the schools that are hurt are the West Division teams. Let's move on here. Rutgers is tied at number 19 for best public universities. Someone above needs to do some research. Rutgers probably does pretty good at research. That's probably why they're number 19 in best public universities. Rutgers is a good school. State University of New Jersey. I'm not a guy that says boot Rutgers. I'm not a guy that says boot anybody. I don't think we should contract at all. It's a much needed step for the Big Ten. It's a much needed going to New York City, expanding to that market. You just have to understand the logistics of what is happening, the logistics of what is all involved in something like this, in conference realignment. Buckshot Kid, Florida State, Miami to the SEC. Florida gets mad. So, okay. You color me intrigued, Mr. Buckshot Kid. Florida State and Miami go to the SEC. Florida says, I thought we were supposed to be the only school in Florida in the SEC. We've got a little bit of an advantage that way. Now, Florida moves to the Big Ten with Missouri and A&M. Now, that is a thought. That is certainly a thought. And that's intriguing. Because a lot of this right now, a lot of this as it stands is still up in the air. Who thought USC and UCLA was coming to the Big Ten? Outside of Greg Pflugar, who saw it coming? Nobody. Eventually, we're going to get to segment 3, but there's too much good stuff right now. We're going to get to some on-the-field talk. It's a little bit of a shorter final segment of the show here tonight. Illini Life, he's been with us for a majority of the show tonight. Adding ASU and Notre Dame would make the Big Ten a good hockey conference. They're already a great hockey conference. They're already one of the best. I think you got to go Hockey East, the Big Ten, and probably the NCHC. Some of your better conferences in college hockey. Wayne Russell, Big Ten Insider Information, said originally it was USC and Notre Dame together. That has been talked about earlier in the show, so that's the second time we've heard that. Notre Dame wants to come in with North Carolina. North Carolina is ready. I've heard UNC also tied together with Virginia. North Carolina and Virginia have had a rivalry for a long time. So Notre Dame, North Carolina, Virginia, and a Florida school. And one Florida school. I appreciate the information, Wayne. That's great. That would be a great move for the Big Ten. Would love to see that. Would love to see that. Would love to see that. To see. That's all very interesting how it pieces together. I think eventually Notre Dame's going to be in the league. North Carolina is probably going to be in the Big Ten. Those, I feel very confidently in Notre Dame and North Carolina eventually. And then I think Virginia, because if it's not the big, I don't know if Virginia, I think the SEC maybe would rather have Virginia Tech than Virginia. We'll see. Who knows? But that's some very good information. Thank you, Wayne, for commenting. Very good for commenting. Thanks everybody for tuning into Big Ten TED Live tonight. It is time for segment 3. We've been talking about so much off the field stuff. We've been talking about conference realignment. We've been talking about TV. It's time. We're yearning for some football. We're yearning for some football talk. So you know what we're going to do now? We're going to talk about some football. We're going to talk about the depth of the Big Ten Conference. How deep is the Big Ten Conference? Because it is a deep league this season, ladies and gentlemen. They are deep at the top with Penn State, with Michigan, with Ohio State. They are very deep at the top. I believe all 3 of those teams are college football playoff contenders. All 3 of those teams can win the Big Ten East. All 3 of those teams can win the Big Ten Conference. Hell, maybe all 3 of those teams could win the national title. Well, maybe that's stretching it a little bit too far, maybe for some of those guys. But the point I'm trying to make is The Big Ten is deep at the top and is deep at the elite level. There are 3 teams that can, in the East Division, that can really come up and really be elite college football playoff type of teams. We know this. That's a fact. But then when you talk about the depth of the Big Ten Conference, you got to talk about the torso of the Big Ten. You got to talk about the girth that it's got in the middle of the league. Because I believe the Big Ten West is very deep. The Big Ten West is going to be much improved in 2023. I think the narrative around the Big Ten West last year they all beat up on each other. They didn't really have a good team. They really didn't have a great team. And then the result was you got an 8-4 Purdue team as your Big Ten West champion, which was nowhere near Michigan. It didn't really belong in the Big Ten championship game. I don't think that's what we're going to see this year. I believe Iowa and Wisconsin stand above the rest, is kind of tier 1 within the Big Ten West. And then you got Illinois and Minnesota, where if things happen with an injury or a bounce of the ball goes one way with Iowa and Wisconsin, maybe the Illini or maybe Minnesota could possibly jump up and take the Big Ten West championship. But I want to look at these teams in the middle of the Big Ten and really emphasize the depth that this league really has. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Maryland, Nebraska, Purdue, Michigan State. Now, you can maybe divide those into 2 tiers, into 3 tiers, something like that. But I believe that's the girth. That's the torso of the Big Ten Conference. I'm going to be saying that all year now. It's the torso of the Big Ten. It's the middle of the Big Ten. I believe, for the most part, there's anybody can beat anybody most times in that section of teams. At the bottom, you've got Nebraska, you've got Purdue, you've got Michigan State. Nebraska has had the talent. Scott Frost was bringing in top 25 classes nationally. He was bringing in top 5 classes in the Big Ten Conference. He was bringing it in. But now you have a coaching staff, a developmental coach in Matt Rule that's been known for developing talent. And he said this himself. He wants to be a developmental program. He wants to see kids develop over time. There's talent at Nebraska. There's talent. It's up to the coaching staff to develop that talent. It's up to Matt Rule. It's up to Marcus Satterfield. It's up to Tony White to get the most out of it. It's there. It's there. Nebraska, I didn't want to call them as a surprise because even though there's a new coaching staff, I just don't feel it with Nebraska. I just don't want to go there yet. Purdue is a team I think that's going to sneak up on a lot of people. High marks for Hudson Card out of spring ball. We've seen what he can do at Texas. Okay, we can see what he did at UT. You look at Maccabee is back in the backfield. I love Corey Gamage, a transfer wide receiver in there as well. You look at a guy like a Mershawn Rice and other guys that are in this wide receiving core that aren't bad. This is an offense that could do something. Defensively, they got a couple of guys, but they got some work to do. You got to think Ryan Walters and Kevin Kane coming over from Illinois is going to really benefit that. And you know they're due for an upset at a night game at Ross-Ade Stadium. It happens. It happens. It seems like every year Purdue is able to knock off somebody. And then Michigan State. Michigan State's got a good front 7 this season, and I know Michigan State has taken some big-time body shots. But this maybe has to be a team that's got to be more physical, running the football, offensive line, maybe less reliance on big plays like there was in 2021. But the front 7 at Michigan State is a very good front 7. Those 3 teams, Purdue, Nebraska, and Michigan State, have to get to a point where they got to get to a bowl game. That's their goal for different points during this season. I look at the middle of the Big Ten and I see a lot. I see Maryland in there they've proven a 7-8 win team. They've been a good mid-tier Big Ten team. Look at Minnesota. 8 and 9 win seasons pretty regularly. You know what you get at Wisconsin. You know what you get at Iowa. Wisconsin and Iowa arguably had down years last year. Iowa was 7-5 in the regular season. Wisconsin was 6-6. That's doing pretty good if you consider down years. You look at what Brett Bielema has done at Illinois. The torso of the Big Ten is pretty good. When I look at the depth, I think it is great depth in the conference. When you look at bad teams, the only bad teams I really possibly look at are Northwestern and Rutgers. Indiana's teetering on an average and a bad team. They've added a lot. And Indiana has an opportunity to bounce back this season. I don't know if they're going to do quite enough to get to bowl eligibility. But when you talk about the depth of the Big Ten, there are very few gimmies on this schedule. There are very few games where you look around and say, well, they're going to win, or they're going to definitely win, or this is no doubter. I don't think there's many of those in the Big Ten Conference this year. I think there's a lot of depth. I try to predict upsets. We try to, but a lot of times we don't really go out on a limb big time. I did a video about 4 upsets that could change the Big Ten. Most of those could happen, and I don't know if it would be the biggest surprise in the world. But when I look around right now, I see a Big Ten that can be very strong, that can be very deep. I think the Big Ten West is going to be better and it's going to be more improved in 2023, and it's going to be better than a lot of people think. And then you add USC and UCLA in 2024. You keep on adding these teams, and it just gets better and better for the Big Ten Conference. It's going to be deep. It's going to be fun this year. I can't wait for 2023. All right, we're going to finish things off here tonight by answering some chats. We're almost getting to 10 o'clock. This will probably be the first 2-hour live stream in Big Ten history, and I am here for it. Very appreciative of everybody coming along for the ride here tonight. DF Ost, I talked about this earlier in the show. I understand that the Big Ten does not, this was in segment 1, all the way back in segment 1. I understand that the Big Ten does not want to take responsibility for the demise of the Pac-12. Your thoughts on this issue? That's why I think that they're more patient right now, and that's why maybe you haven't heard anything out of Oregon and Washington. I believe the Big Ten is waiting on Colorado and Arizona, maybe Arizona State and Utah as well, to jump to the Big 12. If that happens, even if it's just 2 of those, even if it's just something like Colorado and Arizona, even if it's just that, I think that could create the opening for the Big Ten to come in and swoop to get to Oregon and Washington. I also mentioned during the show, I believe the Big Ten needs to be the apex predator of conference realignment. I believe they need to be aggressive. They need to buff out their chest and say, we're the show. We're the biggest nationwide conference. We've got the best nationwide brands. Maybe the SEC is the best regional brands, but when you sprawl across the country, in different parts of the country, we're the place to be. I think they got to be aggressive. That's me. Oh, let's see what else we got in the comments here today. It's nearing my bedtime. More from DFO. So the Big Ten will be removing schools from the conference in order to make room for better schools. No, they're going to keep schools in there. They're definitely going to keep schools in the conference. They're just going to keep on adding and adding. You know, I got a video that I might possibly do. Would the Big Ten ever consider contraction? It's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that. It's very difficult for me to imagine that. I just don't see it. Jared Jones, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota are great tier 2 for the Big Ten this season. Illinois's got a good schedule. Illinois has the schedule. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Ohio State. They get Penn State at home early in the season. This is a team at Illinois that I believe they're going to be in the mix, folks. They're going to be in the mix. This is a defense that's going to be stout up front. They've got as good as anybody. They've got as good as anybody up front with Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph. When you talk about a defensive lineman pairing, it doesn't get much better than Illinois. And their linebacking core, I think, is going to be pretty good. They're going to need to replace some big-time players in the secondary, of course, but I believe in what Brett Bielema is building at Illinois. I love what Brett Bielema is building at the University of Illinois. Okay, I look at Luke Altmaier. I think he's going to be a solid quarterback. I see him a lot like I see Tommy DeVito. I think they're pretty comparable, so we'll see about that. But I see Illinois being pretty good this year. And Brett Bielema really starting to build a program and really starting to build a winner and a consistent winner at Illinois. I want to talk about Missouri. I heard about this, John, that they passed a law where they can receive NIL money if they commit to a Missouri. It's a huge advantage. You're right. It's a gigantic recruiting advantage. Missouri is very NIL friendly. And you got to think, are more states going to put more? Are they going to continue where Missouri is? And are they going to build off of that? Because these state legislators, these state representatives, they want to be on board with this. So when you talk about getting reelected, being able to bring in more, having laws and regulations like the state of Missouri, as you're talking about here, that allows your team to get more wins. Sometimes a happy state is reflective of how many games the local college football team wins in the football field. So Missouri wins a couple more games, Mr. or Mrs. Senator might get reelected. For someone that doesn't follow politics but also follows football very closely, I might be one of those people. Thank you, not me, for the comment. Cloak and dagger type of stuff like they have over on Greg's channel. I don't really know what cloak and dagger means, but I know it means got to pay attention in some form or another. Benjamin Hawks. I don't know how becoming Missouri is a meaningful thing. They did pretty good for 2 years with not recruiting as well. Yeah, I don't know about Missouri. Missouri was kind of originally looked at the Big Ten. They had a good start, had a very good start, had an awesome start. Made it to an SEC championship game, but have kind of fallen off since then. Sunshine Design, thanks for being with us. Thanks for being with us tonight. We are over 2 hours, longest live stream to my knowledge in Big Ten TED history. And thanks everybody for being a part of it. Wednesday nights, for those of you watching now, Wednesday nights, 9 Eastern, 8 Central. Next week might be on a Tuesday or a Thursday because of my work schedule, where I got something going on Wednesday night. So it might be Tuesday or Thursday, but normally this is a Wednesday night show, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. Subscribe, ring the bell, get notifications. Come here every single week to talk all things Big Ten. John Berger was with us the entire time. Big Badger fan, John Berger. So thanks for tuning in here the entire time, John. Really appreciate you providing great insight here in the chat tonight. HD 90 Dog really wants to see the West win a division title before the divisions go away. Yeah, this is to be year number 10, I believe, because it started in 2014. And now we're going to go to 2024. So you're going to see this. Yeah, it's probably going to be an undefeated 10-0 for the East Division, but who knows what's going to happen in the West this year. But it would have been nice to see the West win one. Maybe they'll go out with a bang, pull an upset. Jason Noun, I read they thought of kicking out Northwestern back in the 80s for being uncompetitive. From 76 to 81, Northwestern went 3-62. They've had some pretty bad stretches, but shortly after this, I shouldn't say shortly, 14 years after this, 1995 and 1996, the 95 team was the Pat Fitzgerald team. Dennis Green was the head coach. 96, they were a good year. And then 97 on down, they kind of took a step back down as well. But yeah, Northwestern has not been good. And recently, locally, there was a Division III school here in the state of Minnesota, St. Thomas, that was kicked out of the school for being too good, allegedly. And now they moved from Division III to Division I. University of St. Thomas out of St. Paul, Minnesota. So it's happened. It's just now on this level of a scale in the Big Ten, someone's got to do it first. And there's going to be some blowback. They just got to be prepared for that. John Berger, Wisconsin's going either 11-1 or 7-5. That's quite the difference. Either the Longo offense works or it doesn't. They've got the best chance at winning one for the West. If everything works out for Wisconsin, and that's an if everything works out for the Badgers, it could be great. But it also could be not great, as we saw in the spring game. How is this? What's going to be the involvement of Braylon Allen? Everything looks together. They've definitely improved at wide receiver. They've brought in some guys from Cincinnati on that offensive line. Like, they have good players. How's it all going to mesh together? The defense is going to take a step back. How much of a step back might determine the success of Badger football, might determine whether they get to the Big Ten championship game or not. It was a great live stream here tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in the show tonight. Wednesday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time, except maybe next week. Might be a Tuesday or a Thursday. Here's what's coming up on the channel. Here's what's coming up on Big Ten Ted. Tomorrow, we'll be dropping on the channel. What is going to be dropping? I'm going to be dropping a video. 7 a.m. is when my uploaded videos drop. It's going to be who are going to be some of the Big Ten true freshmen that will burst onto the scene in 2023. So we're talking true freshmen on the channel tonight. Check out that video. And then coming up on Friday, I'm going to be talking about lost my train of thought there for a second. On Friday, going to be talking about Minnesota. Is Minnesota going to be able to overcome a tough schedule in 2023? They've got Michigan and Ohio State on the schedule. So going to be talking a little bit of Golden Gophers there on the channel. We're going to be talking a little bit of Golden Gophers. A tough schedule, but I believe Minnesota's got a good team. Jared Jones with the spoiler. Ohio State, 3 out of the top 5, I believe, wide receivers in the country coming out of high school, all going to Ohio State. If that doesn't tell you Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate, Noah Rogers, all going to Buckeye Land, if that doesn't tell you who the wide receiver factory is, I don't know what will. Now, I don't think all 3 of those guys are going to finish their careers at Ohio State, but there's going to be some good guys. LA_Kane fan. Miami fan based in LA. That's what I'm guessing. How many ACC teams do you think the Big Ten will take? I believe it's going to be 4. I don't think it's more than 4. I think the Big Ten's going to end at 22 teams. That's my prediction. You heard it here first. I think it's going to be 4 teams. Because I don't know if, because you got to think the SEC is going to take some teams out of the ACC as well. So it's not just going to be, hey, we got our pickings of 4 teams or 5, 6 teams, whatever it is. You're not, with the SEC taking teams, you're not going to find significant value beyond 4 teams. You're just not. It's just not going to happen. I would argue even like when you get to NC State and Virginia Tech, that you start to lose a little bit of value there as well. The SEC might want to add those just to get into those states, get into North Carolina, get into Virginia, expand their footprint a little bit. But I just don't know if they're as significant adds of what it could be. That'll be it. Going to wrap things up here on the live stream tonight. Thanks, everybody, for being a part. Record duration over 2-hour live stream tonight. I'd have to check, but probably record viewership as well. The channel continues to grow as we continue march towards 2,000 subscribers here on the channel. Big Ten football season is approaching. It will be here before you know it. As mentioned during the top of the show, I announced Sunday night's going to be having the Big Ten Sunday Sound Off. When you kind of digest what happened on Saturday, come on over to the channel on Sundays during football season. Not sure on the time yet. Last year was 6 o'clock Central. Might be a little bit later here this season. But it's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. So we're going to have 2 live streams a week on Wednesday and on Sunday. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate everybody for coming along for the ride. Quick, I'm going to answer one last question from Jared. Call in. These little earbuds. Here's kind of some technical part of this, why I kind of shut down the phone part of it today. Little earbuds. I need to be able to hear what people are saying. And these little wireless earbuds kind of keep on cutting in and out. So we might have to go to some wired headphones that I got around. So that's why I kind of cut this off. I'll cut the call portion off a little bit early. We're going to get some calls eventually. I'd love to hear from everybody on the phone lines, kind of go back and forth on various topics. So keep that in mind in terms of future live streams. But that's kind of why things were a little bit wonky as today. You could probably see me adjusting in my ear. But yeah, these wireless earbuds, not great. They're great for mowing the lawn, but for some reason in here, they don't stay connected. But anyway, that'll be it for Big Ten Ted Live here tonight. Great show, great discussion with conference realignment being a big time topic here throughout college football and on the channel. Until next time, until next week, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.